Okay. 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 Yeah. Thanks. Can you hear me, Krishnan? Can you, Krishnan, can you hear me? Okay, great. So it looks like we're in business. Well, it's 7:55. We have 5 more minutes, so I'm just going to wait for 5 more minutes and start this session at 8 a.m. Boston time sharp, which would be 6:30 p.m. in India. Well, it's 7:58. I'll start in 2 more minutes. I know some of the people are still beginning to join the call, so I'll just wait for 2 more minutes. Well, good morning. Good morning to those of you who are calling in from US. I see some of the people calling in from California, but also good evening to all of you who are in India. I see quite a few of you. And this is a little bit of a strange experience because I don't know whether you can see me properly or hear me properly because it's a one-way communication. So if any of you have problems either seeing me or hearing what I have to say, just make it one of the questions. And that way I'll know that there's an issue and maybe we can resolve it. So the way this is supposed to work is that you keep typing in questions and I will take one question at a time and answer to the extent that I can. And we'll do this for about an hour. And so we should be able to cover a lot of topics. So I have quite a few questions. And one of them says, we do this program called the Sandbox in Hubli, India. And so what is the context for that? So maybe let me just take about 5 minutes and tell you a little bit about what we're doing in that context and how we got there. And maybe that'll answer quite a few of the questions and also maybe trigger new questions for you. So I was in IIT Madras a long time ago. I graduated in 1973 and then came to Canada, did my master's, taught for a year, did my PhD, taught for a little bit, and then worked for Motorola for about 8 years. And we moved to Boston in 1984. So we've been in Boston for quite a while, and right now I'm in Boston, and became an entrepreneur, built a whole bunch of companies in telecommunications, and then a whole bunch of other areas as well. So it was probably year 2000, of almost 18 years ago. We set up our foundation in 1994 after the first company went public. But I and my wife, Jayashree, who also happens to be from IIT Madras, she did her physics from IIT Madras in 1975. We started spending more and more time on the foundation. So, and over the last 18 years, we spend increasingly more time on the foundation, and now maybe spend 95% of our time on the foundation. So how do we look at the foundation? So, if you look at the world has about 7 billion people, out of which about 2 billion people have disposable income, and about 5 billion people don't have disposable income. And both the people who have disposable income and people who don't have disposable income have problems. And the economy, the foundations, the universities, the entrepreneurs, big businesses, all of these collectively try to make a difference in the lives of these people, all the 7 billion people. But the way you make a difference in the life of those who have disposable income is a little different than the way you have impact on the lives of those who don't have disposable income. People who have disposable income have a lot of problems. And in fact, the whole economy, the GDP, the GNP, everything is driven by solving the problems of the people who have disposable income. But when they have a problem, they're Googling for solutions. So if you want to have an impact on the lives of the people who have disposable income, you have to compete for that opportunity. You have to bring something new to the world, either a technology, a business process, or something that the world has not seen before. And so innovation is very important. And when this innovation is directed to some burning problem that people have, you will have an impact. In fact, last 50 years, the world has developed quite a bit of ecosystem to facilitate this whole process. So we have angel investing, we have venture capital, stock market, Amazon, Flipkart, all kinds of distribution channels, and so on. So generally, if you have an idea that's pretty profound and it's directed to some burning problem that people have, you can have an impact. In fact, that was our first philanthropic initiative. I joined the board of MIT in Boston about 20 years ago. And we put about $20 million and started a center called Deshapande Center for Technological Innovation. And that was the primary thesis behind the center. How do you take innovators in MIT and connect them to relevance so that as they're innovating, they can have an impact on the world? And that's been a very successful model. And we funded NSF to launch a program called iCore, which has become a very popular program and a very effective program in the United States. And we just brought that same concept to India and launched a program called Incubate from IIT Madras. So that's how to have impact on the people who have disposable income. Now, people who don't have disposable income, they are just struggling to get through the day. So it's not like they're Googling for better education or clean water or anything like that. So if you want to have an impact on their lives, you have to, number one, co-create the solution with them. And then you have to build capacity within those communities to spread those good solutions. So the equation really gets turned around. It's really relevance plus innovation is equal to impact. And relevance becomes a center stage. And the innovation itself does not have to be earth-shattering, hugely competitive innovation. So to implement this idea, we started a thing called the Social Innovation Sandbox in Hubli, Karnataka. It's around 5 districts, and we've been at it now for about 10 years. So the program has grown into a large program now. We have about 700 people on the payroll. We have a 300,000 square foot campus, a 100,000 square foot incubator. And so we in the campus, we train thousands of young men and women who all have 15, 17 years of education, but don't have a job. And so this program, in about 5 months, I'm very excited that in about 4 months, we can whip these people into shape, teach them the work ethic, the communication skills, some computers, some domain stuff. And it's so heartening to see the people get so excited. They make only 15, 20,000 rupees a month, but they're just as excited as any IITian to go and make a difference in the world. And so that creates a huge amount of energy, and we've been able to then fund and work with about 180 different social innovations, and some of them have scaled large. You probably know Akshay Patra, which is 1.7 million midday meals every day now. Agastya, which teaches science to rural children, that's up to 1 million children, and so on. And so we have a lot of programs that have come up bottoms up in the sandbox, like skilling these young men and women, skilling kids in villages, and a lot of agricultural programs where we do these farm ponds. We're working with 40,000 farmers right now on a Better Cotton initiative, and that's scaling up to 150,000 next year. So it's pretty exciting. And the next 10 years, I'm looking at bringing the two sides together. How do we look at the innovations in IITs, MITs, and so on, and actually find some effective way to connect them to these innovations in the sandbox? So that's an overview of what I've been up to and working on. And so I'm going to stop there and maybe look at some of the questions and encourage you to send more questions so that I can talk about the things that you want to talk about. Okay, so I have a few questions here from Priya and some of the other students. Looks like you're all PhD students trying to look for topics to work on. And so the may you please tell me your view about entrepreneurship, guidance to proceed about PhD in mechanical engineering in MIT. Okay. And then, so I think, it's a little different these days. When we went to school 40, 50 years ago, usually you specialized in something and then you practice that throughout your profession, even though that's not the way my career went. But the general trend was you became a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, and then you spend the rest of your life practicing that particular profession. But things have changed dramatically now. Knowledge by itself does not have the premium that it did a long time ago, because now you can pretty much Google anything and get answers to questions that you have. So the way you should think about this thing now is look for problems that really fascinate you. And once you are passionate about solving a problem, and you should have a good reason as to why you want to solve the problem, and that becomes your cause. And then you sort of pull in whatever you need to solve that problem. So instead of learning everything and then figuring out how to solve a problem, the new way of approaching, whether it's building a company, doing research, or doing anything innovative, is to first fall in love with the problem. And then you say, what do I need to solve this problem? And so most of the exciting work that's going on, let's say at MIT, is all multidisciplinary. And so you don't really look at yourself and say, I'm a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer or a bioengineering engineer. Doesn't matter. You first fall in love with the problem, and then you start doing everything that you need to solve that problem. And of course, you'll have a slightly more focus on mechanical. If you're in mechanical engineering, you may have a slightly more focus in computers if that's what you're doing. And you can see that. In fact, MIT just announced $1 billion initiative to start a college for computer science. So what's new about this particular college of computer science at MIT? It's going to be adding 50 faculty members, but 25 of them in computer science, another 25 of them in other departments who will be working on computer science, connecting it back to computer science. So everything is very multidisciplinary. And so I think you should have a very broad view of what your PhD is going to be in, and pick a problem that really fascinates you. It doesn't matter whether the problem is practical and is going to lead to an economic impact, or maybe it's a profound theoretical problem that's going to open up a whole new area. But you'll always see that most of the major breakthroughs in the world always come because people ask very innocent questions. It's more like a childlike curiosity. When a child says, but why? It's a very interesting question. And when people should not lose that childlike curiosity to ask those questions, even when they become super experts. Even if you look at most of the Nobel Prize breakthroughs, they happen because that innovator has not lost that childlike curiosity. They have the ability to ask simple questions. Why not? And in the process of answering that curious question is where you get these big breakthroughs. So I know there's a lot of questions here, and so just let me take a minute to see if I can maybe summarize a lot of them. So one of the questions is, what are some of the areas, this is from Solomon Suresh, what are some of the areas of business that are generally overlooked but immense potential in the current area? High-tech farming, perhaps. So if you look at the farming, I think particularly in India, where most of the farm holdings are very small. So now you have to solve this problem for the people who don't have disposable income. It's very different coming up with technologies for people who have 10,000 acres, 100,000 acres of farms who use very high-tech stuff, as opposed to farmers in India where they have an acre or 4 acre or 5 acre. But there's a lot of technologies that get developed at the very high end that can be brought back to these farmers, because these farmers, typically the income of 1 acre farm in India is about 1/8 of the income of the farms that use most advanced technology, like in Israel, for example, where there's so little water, but the productivity is fantastic. So the few interventions that we have found is that, for example, water makes one of the biggest difference in India. And a lot of the places in India where farmers don't have the water is not because it doesn't rain, but they don't have the water when they need it. So let's say in some of the places where they get 50 centimeters of rain, that's considered a drought. That's a lot of water. And so we have a program where we dig these farm ponds, where if you dig 100 feet by 100 feet by 12 feet, that's enough storage to irrigate about 5 acres of farmland. And water turns out to be one of the biggest multipliers of income. And so in 5 acres, typically where they may make 1 lakh income, with the farm pond, they're able to get anywhere from 2 to 3 lakhs, which is a huge multiplier. Then I think the use of fertilizers and pesticides are another discipline where there's a lot of technology, a lot of chemistry and understanding of what you really need. Because a poor farmer, he does not understand, he just knows that there's a thing called a fertilizer and a pesticides. So whenever he needs something, he just goes to the trader, to the shop and says, hey, I have this problem, what should I do? And the guy who's selling it also does not have a lot of knowledge, and his only motivation is to sell and make money. And so he just gives him whatever he has on the shelf. And so by bringing a little bit more discipline to the farmers, and the way we're doing it is that it turns out that you need about 1 person who has a little bit of a knowledge of pesticides farming and some of these farming techniques to help about 500 farmers. Because the farmers themselves, even if you have internet access, are not capable of consuming that information and finding out what they need to do. So a person who makes 10, 15,000 rupees a month is whom we employ, and we train them, and then they're networked so that whenever they have a question, they can send a WhatsApp question, and some expert who's sitting at the center can answer that question so that he can take it to the farmer, so that he can help him when he needs pesticides or right fertilizer or how to space the crop and so on. The third area is the supply chain. The farmers make some money, but they spend a lot of money on the farming. And part of that reason is because they don't have a good supply chain. So if there is a way, we can do these farmer producer organizations or some organizations where farmers can come together and improve their supply chain so that the cost of farming can go down, that can be a huge impact. And then the last part is getting enough for what they produce. The farmers always get caught because if they don't have a good yield, they don't have income. If there's a good yield, then there's just too much supply and they don't get the price. And so So working on the supply chain, both on the input side, the output side, and then the water, and then giving them simple suggestions on how to sort of use the pesticides and fertilizers is a huge help. And then once they get beyond that, then we can introduce them to hydroponics and a whole bunch of new things that the world is trying out, which can be very, very useful. So let me look at some of the questions. Okay, so it's one of the entrepreneurs who wants me to Surya Satyavolu, and his question is, what was it like when you were getting started with Cascade Communications, a company that I started in 1990, to raise money and for an idea that was pretty new at that time. So, in 1990s, when we were starting companies, it wasn't common for people to start companies. In fact, in all of Boston, there were maybe 6 or 7 entrepreneurs who had made pretty big impact. I mean, Boston was the mini computer headquarters of the world. So we had Ken Olsen, who had started Digital Equipment Corporation, Ed DeCastro, who had started DG, and Apollo Prime. There were quite a few of the mini computer companies, but there were maybe 5 or 6 of them. And so entrepreneurship wasn't what it is today. Today, entrepreneurship is pretty much a career. So as long as you make a commitment to be an entrepreneur, you can try one thing, and if it doesn't work out, you get to do it again. And then if that doesn't work out, you get to do it again. And as long as you're sincere and working hard, and the failures are not because of your effort, but more because of some circumstantial things or a shift in the market and so on, every time your chances of being successful go up. So entrepreneurship these days is more a career, where if something doesn't work out, you're more highly qualified entrepreneur for your next venture. Whereas in the early days, the venture capital was not there. So the biggest venture capitalist in Boston in 1990 would have been somebody with a fund of maybe $20 million. So when they wrote a check for about $1 million, they wanted to make sure that if that thing didn't work out, you hurt more than they hurt. And so you had to go through, so they wanted to make sure that you really were committed to the company that you wanted to start, which meant you had to mortgage your wife, your kids, your house, and everything else, and probably go without a salary for a long time. And so they really wanted to see that commitment. So, but I think the process of looking for something that can change the world in a big way is a common theme. It doesn't matter when you start the company, you want to start something that can have a big impact. So whenever you start a company, I think 2 things need to come together. Number one, it has to have a big vision so that it can become a large company. But at the same time, you have to figure out a small step that you can take so that you can actually implement something, get a customer, and the customer pays you back for that. So the vision has to be big, but the way you get to that vision has to be small steps. The smaller the step, the more likely it is that you'll get there. So a good successful entrepreneurs are the people who can manage both sides of that equation. Because, when you start your entrepreneurial journey, you'll find 3 things that are always true. Number one, it's harder than you think. It'll take longer than you think, and it'll require more money than you think. So once you start your entrepreneurial journey, unfortunately, there's no good news. There's only bad news. So doing anything is hard. So there's no point in doing something very hard that doesn't lead to something substantial. So you want a very big vision. But at the same time, most of the companies fail because they try to do too much. Because one of the things that you don't have as an entrepreneur is resources. And so most of the time, people are not able to get through the first piece that they're trying to do, and they abandon halfway through because they just run out of money, run out of time, run out of resources. People lose their heart and just quit. And so you want to make sure that you get a step that's very small to climb, and you're not failing because you don't have resources to climb that step. Now, when I started Cascade, the idea behind Cascade, which now looks very obvious, was that at that time, every phone was connected to every other phone in the world. But the computers were primarily connected within a company. So IBM would have all their computers connected. Ford Motor Company would have all their Ford companies connected. So my big idea was that just like every phone is connected to every other phone in the world, I said, well, every computer has to get connected to every other computer in the world, which meant two big differences. Number one, most of the computer networks were built by a company, which is okay if you just want people within your company to talk to each other. But if you want to connect any computer to any other computer in the world, the computer network has to become a public network. And if you were to build a large public network like that, then you need switches, just like the telephone switches. You need switches that can handle data. So building data switches for public networks was the opportunity for Cascade. And it just turned out to be very timely that when we designed the product and started selling it, the internet just came along. And internet legitimized that idea. And then when in 95, 96, after 5-6 years, Cascade was carrying 80-90% of the internet traffic, the backbone traffic. And so I think you start with a big idea, but then you figure out small steps to climb so that you can actually survive and get an opportunity to get closer and closer to the customers and build things that bring a high value to them. Well, let me browse through some more questions here. I have a lot of them. Okay, so I have a question here from Pradyumn Karagi, who does not have an IIT degree, and he has an idea and he wants to scale. And he says, how important is it to have a degree from IIT? Degree from IIT or MIT and so on are okay, but they are not the determining factors. I think it's your ability to have an open mind. And when you build these companies, you may have at some point some very specialized problem you need to solve. And you may hire people who are specialized in those areas. And those people could be from MIT and IIT and so on. In some ways, when you go to MIT and IIT, you have a handicap in terms of being an entrepreneur, because when you graduate from these prestigious schools, you have a brand name and you have a lot of opportunities. All the companies come and offer you big paychecks. And so there's an opportunity cost, for you to walk away from a big fat salary and take an entrepreneurial path, which is painful and no income for a long time. So it's delayed gratification. It's not an instant gratification. It's harder. And a lot of times when people don't have those opportunities, it's in some ways it's easier to become an entrepreneur because you have nothing to lose. And so I think degrees are important, but not really that important. What I find in life is that it's your ability to have an open mind, look at a problem in a most objective way, and then find solutions to those problems. So in some ways, I think I look at life more as a telescope and a microscope. Some people are good in telescope, people who can sort of zoom out and look at the big picture and come up with philosophy of life frameworks and be able to paint a very big picture. And these are the people who are telescopes, who are very good as ability to look at the big picture. And then you have people who have microscopic knowledge, who, let's say, a heart specialist or a material scientist, who can look all the way down at the atoms and tell you how to put them all together so that you can get carbon nanofiber or some specialized things. And both those skills are very important, right? Because there are some problems which are tough nuts to crack, you cannot solve unless you get into a great deal of depth. And in fact, a lot of the people who get PhD develop that skill. In fact, the usual joke for PhD is that you don't get a PhD until you find something that the world has not seen before. You need something new. And so PhD is all about knowing more and more about less and less. And you get your PhD when you know everything about nothing. Whereas entrepreneurship and common sense and being a telescope is all about knowing nothing about everything, just knowing a little bit so that you don't lose that perspective of what it is that you're trying to do. So what I find is that it's fantastic if you can actually have both the abilities. You always zoom out and look at the big picture and see what the world needs and where you can add value and still be able to look at the world in a very broad perspective. But when you find an opportunity, you can also dig deep and diagnose the problem and come up with solutions. And so ability to dig deep, but also be able to zoom out and look at the big picture, I think is an ability that will help all of you in a big way. And zooming out and looking at things is nothing but common sense. And unfortunately, common sense is the one that's not very common. So even when you become experts in something, make sure that you don't lose your common sense. And so I know quite a few of you are looking at doing PhD and very deeply involved in a lot of things. So build your capabilities to dig deep and get to the be able to solve problems that are very specific. But also in the process, don't lose your common sense. I think that's the risk of being a researcher. When you're a researcher, you hang around with a group of people who are so focused on one narrow field that all the time it becomes an intellectual wrestling match, debating over issues that are so small that sometimes you lose your perspective. So if you're a researcher, make sure that you don't lose your common sense and always be able to zoom out and be able to explain to your grandmother as to what you're doing. If you're an entrepreneur, make sure that you value the fact that there are people who can zoom and dig deep and solve the problem. So when you have a problem that needs to be solved, when there's an area where you're trying to build a competitive advantage, make sure that you get people who are very good in that. For example, when I did Sycamore Networks, Sycamore was all about optical fiber. It was optics and fiber. And so I was more a telescope. I sort of knew where the technology would fit, the huge value it would bring and everything else. But I had zero background in optics or fiber. And so I had co-founders like Eric Swanson and Rick Barry, who are all MIT graduates who had spent all their life studying those technologies. And so when they came in, they hired a whole bunch of these PhDs from Bell Labs and all over the world. And we had probably one of the deepest bench strengths in optics and fiber communication. So if you're an entrepreneur, you need to make sure that you relate to and attract talent that has very deep knowledge in an areas where you're trying to build your competence and be able to attract them and hang on to them. If you are deep in something, make sure that you don't lose your common sense, so that you're always coming out of that depth and saying, well, where can this be useful? How do I explain this in simple terms? If I'm a researcher, what are the areas that I should be researching that can actually have an impact on the world? And so having ability to do both, I think is a very important skill to have. Well, let me look at some more questions here. Okay, so this is Bharatwajan Balaji. He's saying, what is a good way to try a new field, say engineering, business, finance, research? So I think it's a question of context. Some people are very quick studies and they get into a new area and get very deep and almost become number one in it. And if you're an entrepreneur, you will find that you have to know a lot of things, but to some extent, you don't have to know them. You don't have to publish a paper in that area. For example, when I started my first company, I knew nothing about finance or marketing or business. And so what you can do is just, make friends with people who have done those things before. And then, you can just get simple books, introductory books, because when you're trying to get into another area altogether, I would not. So there's two groups of people. One group of people where they do like to look at things in a very deep way, and they want to publish and they want to do research things that the world has not seen before. Those people also these days have a huge opportunity when they shift their areas. In fact, the best researchers that I've seen are the ones who work in a particular area, publish, do a lot of stuff, and then they walk away from the whole thing and then do something totally new. For example, at MIT, let's say we have a cancer research center. So in the cancer research center, who are the people in there? 50 years ago, if you said cancer research, it would all be people from biology. Not anymore. We have electrical engineers, we have civil engineers, we have mechanical engineers, biological engineers, biology, physics, chemistry. So these are all people who have no background in cancer research. So in research, if you have the ability to dig deep into one particular thing and you're looking for having an impact, moving to a totally different area and starting a research in that area, I think can be hugely rewarding, because you already know how to do research, you know how to ask deep questions, and you go to a totally new area and you start asking those questions. And those questions have never been asked in that area, and therefore you'll get huge dividends. So that's the way you can do research in multidisciplinary areas and pull them together. If you're an entrepreneur, you're mostly focused on making sure that you're solving a problem that's worth solving. Whether it's a social entrepreneur or an economic entrepreneur, you really want to do something that has a huge value. In fact, in a research, you're trying to crack a tough nut, which can have a big impact. In business, and if you're an entrepreneur, you're always trying to solve problems which are somewhat easy to solve, but has a huge value. The value that you bring to the people with the solution that you're going to solve is the number one thing. And then what happens is that if you do in fact find a niche where you're doing something that can add value and you start scaling it, then you need everything. You need engineering, you need production, you need marketing, you need supply chain, you need finance, you need distribution channel, you need sales. So you need all these different things to actually scale. And so when you start scaling, it's a little bit like a chain. And it's a chain that consists of team, engineering, supply chain, finance, all of these things. And when you start scaling the business, it's a little bit like it becomes stressful, and it's like you're pulling on the chain. And when you pull on the chain, what breaks is not your strength. What breaks is the weakest link in the chain. And so that's where the entrepreneurs have to move a little bit away from their passion, because most of the entrepreneurs start with strength in one area. Maybe they're very strong in business or technology or something. And they start the whole company because they have that particular strength. But I found that most of the companies get up to maybe 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, and then they don't scale because they don't have the ability to focus on their weakness. They continue to keep focusing on the strength. So if something isn't selling, if you're good in engineering, you always think that you can engineer the product just a little bit better so that people will just buy it. No, that doesn't work. You need sales, you need marketing, you need finance, you need supply chain, you need logistics, you need customer service. So you need all of those things. So having an open mind and knowing what the weakness is in the company and then trying to shore it up so that you can scale is a very important aspect. And that's a process that never stops. Doesn't matter whether you're a 1 million, 100 million, a billion, 10 billion, 100 billion. Even if you look at the very large company, there's always one area that's weaker than the rest of them to be able to build the business, to be able to scale to the next level. And CEOs and entrepreneurs have to be very good in being objective about their own strengths and weaknesses and make sure that they pay enough focus to their weaknesses. Well, I know I have a lot of questions here, and we have another 20 minutes left. So let me just take a minute and thumb through the questions here. So one of the questions is Sandeep Gangaram, and he's saying, we at IIT Madras, we have a lot of technology, for example, AI. So how can we do AI for social good in the Indian context? So, I think technology and merging that with the social good is something that actually fascinates me, because the world hasn't quite figured out how to do that right. On one side, you have people who are very good in technology, and they constantly say, how can I use this technology to make it a better world, particularly for the people at the bottom of the pyramid? And so they start with a question that says, what can I do that I know how to do and that can help the people? So if you know AI, you say, how do I use AI to make it better education system, create better mental health, and so on. And if you're a software guy, you always say, hey, how can I do an app on an iPad that's going to solve all the education problems in rural India? And that disconnect, actually what happens is that ideas remain to be ideas and they don't get out there in the real world. So the social innovation sandbox that we're working on is a way to build capacity within those communities to be able to absorb bigger and bigger ideas. So, but once they start scaling, once they get large, for example, we have Akshay Patra where we do 1.7 million midday meals every day. And so things that scale do start collecting a lot of data. And then once you have a lot of that data, I think then you can use technology. You can bring big ideas, big resources, and big talent to solve the problem. But first, I think you have to make sure that you co-create the solution with the people that you're trying to help. and make sure that you have some traction and build it up to a certain level, and then bring in the new ideas. In fact, when I was talking to Mr. Ratan Tata last January, he was pretty excited about this. And so we have a Tata Deshapande Innovation Center that we have set up in Hubli in the sandbox. And the idea behind this center is to find a ways to connect big ideas, big talent to the benefit of the billion people at the bottom of the pyramid. But it takes a lot of give and take. It takes a lot of ability to have an open mind on part of the people who have come up from the bottom up, who really are connected with the people that you're trying to help and understand the problem very deeply, to have an open mind and say, how do I accept new ideas, new technologies, and so on? And then the people who are working on big ideas, they need to be humble enough to sort of, if they're motivated by impact, they need to realize that there's no silver bullet. It's not like any of these technologies are going to come up with a solution that will just solve every problem in the world. Because even if you come up with a fantastic solution, you need people to be able to absorb it, understand it, accept it, and so on. So if you are working on a very high-tech stuff, and if you're looking for impact, make sure that you connect with organizations and people who have a huge amount of ground force and are working on solving that problem on the ground, so that you work with them and really understand what the problems are. This is really innovation plus relevance is equal to impact. You don't want to innovate whole thing in a vacuum and then try to take it out there, which is what happens in most of the universities. And the program that we just launched called the Incubate in the Gopal Krishna Deshapande Center at IIT Madras is all about that. How do we make sure? So the way that works is that a faculty member, a lead entrepreneur, and a mentor become a part of the program. And over the course of 7 weeks, they do customer discovery. They actually go and talk to 100 customers. And then at the end of it, they either conclude one of the three things. They either say, fantastic technology, fantastic fit, let's go do it. Or they say, good technology, likely fit, but there's a lot of missing pieces, we need to work on those. Or they say, fantastic technology, but no fit, not for the time being. Maybe we should revisit 10 years from now and not look for that impact. So I think getting connected with the problem is more of an issue when high technologies like AI and other things are trying to impact people at the bottom of the pyramid. So if you look for ways where there's already big data, national data banks or health or something like that, there I think you can start seeing some immediate impact. But I'm very pleased that India is also setting up a lot of these centers. In fact, there's a Wadhwani Center for Artificial Intelligence in Bombay, where I think they have a lot of AI researchers now who are totally focusing on trying to see how they can apply some of these technologies to the benefit of the billions. But it's a work in progress, and we all need to find good ways to have the impact. Well, I have another 13 minutes, so let me look through some of the questions here and see if I can find something that I haven't talked about. Well, I know a lot of you are PhDs, and Sai Krishna Reddy says, what is your advice for aspiring academic professor in IIT in India? I think if you look at universities are essentially in two businesses. One is expanding human knowledge, and expanding any human knowledge is a noble effort. But if you're in IIT and if you're more engineering oriented, you're looking for some impact with the work that you do. So there are ways in which you can expand the human knowledge in ways that it can have bigger impact, or it can just be expansion of knowledge. So, and then if you do come up with an idea where you can have an impact, then you need entrepreneurs who can take that forward. And that's the other part of your business, which is teaching students. So I think what you should focus on is finding ways to do research in a way so that you can have impact. And secondly, train students so that they're entrepreneurial, so that they can take these ideas and do something with it. So I would very highly encourage that you look at Incubate program from GDC, Gopal Krishna Deshapande Center at IIT Madras. It's a program that's across the country. I don't want that program to be captive to IIT Madras. It's really a program that's open to professors all across India. In fact, the first 2 batches this year we did in IIT Madras. The next batch will be done in IIT Bombay. And I think there's already 20 teams that have signed up. So what Incubate does is it does that. It connects professors and graduate students who are working on a particular problem to the marketplace. And so you're a young faculty member and you will have PhD students and master's students. And so you have to teach them how to do research in a new way. I think we can all get trapped inside the campus and just keep working on problems. So this is a generic problem. What is a generic problem? Innovation cannot be mandated. So to have innovation, you have to create a nurturing environment. And that's what campuses are. But anytime you create a nurturing environment, whether it's a university or a think tank, it becomes clubby. And that club tends to move further and further away from the real world. And because it's a nurturing environment, you can't go there and mandate and say, you shall produce this. And slowly, those clubs become more into impressing each other as opposed to impact, even though they have a desire for impact. And therefore, if you want to have impact from a nurturing environment, you have to have a very conscious effort to connect that nurturing environment to the real world. So anything that you can do to connect yourself, your graduate students, your undergraduate students to the real world, and it's all open to you and it's all accessible to you, which you don't know. Because if you are, when we started the center in MIT 20 years ago, I remember after one of our things, one young faculty member was all excited, big grin on his face. And I said, what are you so happy about? He said, oh, I met a venture capitalist. So even in MIT, it wasn't that common 20 years ago for a researcher to actually meet venture capitalists or entrepreneurs or business people and so on. But now it's a very common thing in MIT. So I'm hoping all the IIT professors will start spending much of their time, quite a bit of time, getting outside of the campus so that they're connected with the real problems in the world, so that as they pick and choose problems to solve within the research, they're picking problems that have a better possibility of having impact. And so good luck with your start, and I hope you will start getting this new breed of researchers, because in India, I understand we're almost spending about 10,000 crores now in research. So that's quite a bit of investment. And so all the researchers have the responsibility to make sure that they create economic and social impact with the work that they're doing. And all this money that's being invested by the taxpayers has to create a virtuous cycle where that investment creates impact, and that impact creates more wealth, better lifestyle, and then that can feed back into more research. So I wish you all the best. Well, I have 8 more minutes, so probably I can answer one question. So let me just take a minute to browse through the different questions we have here. So this is Balaji, who says, how do you stay focused in a problem you want to solve? Sometimes you don't have the right people or enough people around. How do I stay motivated? I think it's when, one of the characteristics of good innovators, good entrepreneurs it's actually two characteristics I find which are very useful. Number one, they tend to be naive. Secondly, they're very optimistic. So what does naive mean? Naive means that, some people think that they can save the world, they can feed every hungry person in the world. They think they can solve the big problems of any big problem. So in some ways, it's very naive to think that you can actually do it. But that naivety actually helps you because it gets you started. If people are very thoughtful and who know everything, it doesn't matter which problem you're trying to solve, you can think through the whole thing and you can conclude that it's impossible to solve the problem. People who are naive are more committed to solving the problem, and they say, it doesn't matter, I'm going to solve the problem. And then when you start solving the problem, there's nothing but trouble, right? I mean, you don't have people, you don't have the right people, and it's very disheartening and so on. But the good entrepreneurs and good innovators are also very optimistic. And so somehow they have this irrational feeling that tomorrow is going to be better than today. They're just optimistic, right? And whether it's true or not, it makes no difference. I think the best entrepreneurs I've seen are the ones who get into big time trouble, and then you call them up and you say, what happened? They say, no, I think I have a solution for it. Because you break it down into small pieces, and then you solve that little piece, and you experience that aha moment where you think you have a solution, and then that motivates you. And that's true not just for entrepreneurs, but also for researchers. I mean, Edison, he went through, I don't know, maybe 900 failures or something like that, but he never got discouraged. He said, every failure is another way that I know doesn't work, and therefore it leads to the right way to make it work, right? So I think hanging around with people who are optimistic, that's why I think building these networks is very important, because you'll then realize that anybody who's done anything significant in life always goes through the same experience. And the only difference between who actually get things done and people who don't get things done is that ability to be optimistic and stay with the problem. In fact, I don't know if you can look at any big institution that gets built, any big business that gets built, any big research that gets done, where that person just had a straight line of good luck and he just went there. Almost everybody goes through those failures. And if you have the ability to withstand those failures and hang in there, what it does is it broadens your comfort zone. When people grow up in a very limited comfort zone where things are all lined up for them, they don't have the ability to take pain, either a mental pain or physical pain, and therefore they crack very quickly. But people who hang in there and can get through those situations suddenly expand their comfort zone. They're able to take a lot more risk, because then, a lot of times you're afraid of something and you go through it and then you say, is this all there is to it? And that attitude of the ability to take pain, I think is very profound, because if you can have a big comfort zone and you're able to withstand a lot of stress and pain, and then it becomes more an enjoyable journey as opposed to constantly being worried about things going wrong. You never want to live a life where you're worried about things going wrong all the time. Things are going to go wrong. There's no way you can buy enough insurance in life so that nothing ever goes wrong. But your ability to look at life with open eyes and be able to deal with the situation and find problems, I think is a skill that will serve you well and will keep you truly motivated to do things that you want to do. And so I know there's a lot of questions here, but we're coming to an end. We just have a couple of minutes. And when I browse through all the questions that we have here, it looks like I'm really seeing two sets of people who are entrepreneurial and want to go out and do things, and then young professors and researchers who are now getting more into research area. So I think as a parting comment, what I would say is that it doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a professor. Make sure that you keep an open mind. Don't get hung up on silly things. Don't get hung up in your narrow view, a narrow field. The best ideas happen when you embrace diversity, when you embrace different ideas, when you talk to people. Don't be dismissive. When people say something is wrong, we all want to hear good news. So when people say something is wrong, first thing we want to do is to argue with them and tell them as to why they're wrong. Don't do that. Have the ability to listen carefully. Maybe there's a merit to what they're saying. And keeping an open mind and learning from each other, I think is a skill that'll serve all of you very well, because both entrepreneurs and researchers tend to be very intense people, because that's their profession. They have to be intense to actually get things done. But don't make that intensity work against you. Have an open mind. You may have to pivot. You may have to change your business model. You may have to change the research topic that you're working on. But to be able to do that, the question is, the good people do it very quickly. The people who are not so good take a long time. And so the only difference between the two is how good a listener you are. So ability to listen, ability to be objective, ability to have an open mind, ability to have a curious mind, all of these will serve you well. Thank you very much. I know the hour went by pretty quickly. I hope you're all able to listen and hear me properly, because I don't get a feedback on the system. And I really appreciate so many of you coming online and giving an opportunity, some of the thoughts that I have. If any of you, I have a small book. It's called the, Entrepreneurship and Impact. It's a very simple book that sort of has a questions and answer format. So if any of you are interested, please send an email to my assistant, who is also on the call. Her email address is Paulette, 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 Paulette at Deshapande If you send that email to her, she'll send you a copy of the book. Thank you very much and wish you all the best. Thank you.